Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashtotarashta Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhaichana Aravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashtotarashta Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samaveta Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jainitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 7, text number 10. Yad artena vinamushya yadarthena vinamushya pumsa atma viparyayah pratiyata upadrashtuh svashiraschedhanadikah yadarthena vinamushya pumsa atma viparyayah pratiyata upadrashtuh svashiraschedhanadikah yadarthena vinamushya pumsa atma viparyayah pratiyata upadrashtuh svashiraschedhanadikah. Yet, thus, arthena, a purpose or meaning, vina, without, amushya, of such a one, pumsaha, of the living entity, atma viparyayah, upset about self-identification, pratiyate, so appear, upadrashtuh, of the superficial onlooker, svashiraha, own head, chedana adika, cutting off. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So this is the horror verse. Translation: the living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Purport: a teacher in school once threatened his pupil that he would cut off the pupil's head and hang it on the wall so that the child could see how his head had been cut off. The child became frightened and stopped his mischief. Similarly, the miseries of the pure soul and the disruption of his self-identification are managed by the external energy of the Lord, which controls the mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. Actually, there is no bondage or misery for the living entity, nor does he ever lose his pure knowledge. In his pure consciousness, when he thinks a little seriously about his position, he can understand that he is eternally subordinate to the mercy of the Supreme, and that his attempt to become one with the Supreme Lord is a false illusion. Life after life, the living entity falsely tries to lord it over material nature and become the lord of the material world, but there is no tangible result. At last, when frustrated, he gives up his material activities and tries to become one with the Lord and speculate with much jugglery of words, but without success. These activities are performed under the dictation of the illusory energy. The experience is compared to the experience of one's having his head cut off in a dream. The man whose head has been cut off also sees that his head has been cut off. If a person's head is severed, he loses his power to see. Therefore, if a man sees that his head has been cut off, it means that he thinks like that in hallucination. Similarly, a living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord, and he has this knowledge with him. But artificially he thinks that he is God himself, and that although he is God, he has lost his knowledge due to Maya. This conception has no meaning, just as there is no meaning to seeing one's head being cut off. This is the process by which knowledge is covered, and because this artificial, rebellious condition of the living entity gives him all troubles, it is to be understood that he should take to his normal life as a devotee of the Lord and be relieved from the misconception of being God. The so-called liberation of thinking oneself God is the last reaction of avidya, by which the living entity is entrapped. The conclusion is that a living entity, deprived of eternal transcendental service to the Lord, becomes illusioned in many ways. Even in his conditional life, he is the eternal servant of the Lord. His servitude under the spell of illusory Maya is also a manifestation of his eternal condition of service. Because he has rebelled against the service of the Lord, he is therefore put in the service of Maya. He is still serving, but in a perverted manner. When he wants to get out of service under material bondage, he next desires to become one with the Lord. This is another illusion. The best course, therefore, is to surrender unto the Lord and thus get rid of the illusory Maya for good, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7.14, Devi yesha gunamayi mama maya duratya mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. Om ajnana timarandasya gyananjana shalakaya chakshunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya manobishtam stapitam yena bhutale swayam rupa kadamayam dadati swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vansha Kalpaturubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Vacham Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this chapter starts off with Vidura asking Maitreya, his guru, two questions. And the way in which he asked these questions is of notable importance. He asked these questions in a very subordinate and submissive way, which is the method that we need to ask questions in order to gain knowledge. The other day, we were hearing in class, Nrsimha Prabhu was explaining different attributes of advancement in bhakti. So one can be advanced in bhakti purely because of their knowledge, their advanced knowledge. Regardless of one's age, one can be advanced in bhakti simply because of their material age as well. Usually it's thought that with age comes wisdom. In the case of bhakti, that's true. But in the case of material knowledge, that may not be true. Because material knowledge misleads us further and further from understanding that we're a servant of Krishna. So the more you age with materialistic knowledge, then the less wise a person would get. Then another way is whoever takes initiation first. That's another criteria as well. If someone has taken initiation first, then spiritually they're considered to be older than someone who takes initiation afterwards. So like that, there's different criteria. And purity. Purity is another one. Purity and realization in bhakti. So one who's more pure and more realized, Krishna within the heart has given him more realizations on the path of bhakti, how to advance in pure devotional service. Then such a devotee, regardless of their age, may be considered to be more advanced than someone else who is more older. But traditionally in bhakti, we see in our devotional community, those who are older, they're generally respected a lot, right? Like we have senior Prabhupada disciples or senior Maharajas, Swamis, senior Prabhus and Matajis. They're respected because with the cultivation of devotional knowledge, spiritual knowledge about Krishna, one gets more pure, one becomes more realized, and one becomes more controlled, self-controlled. And, as it says, Rupa Goswami says in the beginning of his nectar instruction, such a person is fit to make disciples all over the world and to instruct people in Krishna consciousness. So in this way, Uddhava is asking two questions. He asks, one is on the category of Ishvara, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the other is on the category of Jiva. Yesterday, Kamsari Prabhu was covering the answer to Maitreya's answer to the question on Ishvara, which is, Vidura asked him that how can the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he just heard about the creation of the universe, how can the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is fully transcendental, come in touch with the material modes of nature or act with them in the material world? Because we understand that he expands himself, becomes Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, and then Kshirodakashaya Vishnu. How can someone who's transcendental come in touch with the three modes? In other words, how can the superior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Jivas, and he himself, how can they be the cause of something inferior? How can they come in contact with, and how can they be the cause of something inferior, like the material energy or the three modes? How can the superior energy be the cause of such things? And yesterday's purport, which Kamsari Prabhu was reading, we saw that our acharyas, specifically Srila Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they gave a very brilliant answer. The answer was the analogy of the sun. Right? The sun is bright, luminous, very hot, yet it is the sun which gives rise to contrary energies. The sun gives rise to clouds because it evaporates the water from the oceans, which then create clouds. It creates darkness, which is interesting because the sun is the source of light, but the very sun, which is the source of light, also creates darkness as well. Because when the clouds come and they block the sun, it creates darkness. Then in the purport it was mentioned that the sun also is responsible for snow. So I was thinking about that. So first of all, you can understand that snow actually comes when rain actually gets frozen. That's how snow comes. So we know that the clouds come from the sun. They're formed by the sun. And then when it starts to rain, then from the clouds, then the sun is also the source of rain. Now, when the sun creates the clouds, what happens? The weather gets cold, right? Because there's no heat energy to warm up the planet, the surface of the planet. So then it becomes cold. So when the coldness becomes so much, the rain which is falling down actually gets frozen and turns into snow. Right? So the sun creates these three or four rather contrary energies. That's one point. It creates an energy which is unnatural or distinct from it, separate from it, opposite to it. And the second thing is that these energies which it creates have the ability to cover itself up. Clouds, rain, snow, and the darkness which is created by these three things have the ability to cover up the sunshine. So in the same way, Krishna also creates from his spiritual energy. What comes from it is Maya, which acts contrary, like as Prabhu was saying, Achit, Asat and Nirananda, which is three contrary things to the spiritual energy, Satchitananda, but they have the ability to cover up the soul, which is Satchitananda. The soul is Satchitananda, but the material energy, which is Asat, Achit and Nirananda, covers up the Satchitananda of the soul. So this is the thing. And we can understand when it comes to how can something inferior come from something superior. The very fact that something is superior, it's superior because within its superiority, it contains that which is inferior. That's why it's superior. Something which is inferior can't contain the characteristics of something which is superior. But something which is superior contains the characteristics of something else which is inferior, and that's what makes it superior. I'll give you an example. If you take mobile phones, for example, right? You could say, if you compare a brick phone to a smartphone, right? Then the inferior quality, which is the common thing between both phones, is that both phones can text and call. Both phones can text and call. But comparatively speaking, the smartphone can do so many other things. Therefore, and the brick phone can only text and call. Therefore, the texting and the calling is like an inferior energy, right? But the mobile phone the smartphone is considered superior because it contains the inferior qualities of texting and calling, but it also contains the superior qualities of being able to do so many other things, like surfing the internet, checking your email, playing music, taking pictures, all these different things. And something similar can be understood, like recently we've been talking about the different types of pramanas, ways of understanding knowledge. And one of the 10 pramanas that we discussed was sambhava. And sambhava essentially means to understand something through inclusion. So the example that we gave to understand sambhava was that if someone has $100, then automatically that person has $50. Automatically that person has $20. So whatever costs $20, a person who has $100 can already buy it. Whereas a person who only has $5 can't buy something which is costing $20. So that's understanding this principle through inclusion. Therefore we can understand that the superior energy of Krishna through the principle of sambhava, through the principle of inclusion, must therefore contain the inferior energy also. But the inferior energy of Krishna cannot contain something which is superior. And we can apply this same knowledge to the 5 different types of rasas or relationships that we can have with Krishna, that the soul has with Krishna. I was just reading this a few days ago in Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. We see that there's 5 rasas: Shantaras, Dasyaras, Sakyaras, Vatsalyaras, and Madhuryaras. Each one of these rasas successively contains within it, includes within it, through sambhava, includes within it the characteristics of the ras preceding it. For example, Srila Prabhupada is saying that the characteristic of devotees in Shantaras is 2. They have 2 main qualities. The first quality is that they have unflinching faith in Krishna. And the second quality that devotees in Shantaras have is that they have completely ceased all material desires. So they have unflinching faith in Krishna and they have ceased all material desires. Now that in itself is a very lofty quality to have no material desires and to have unflinching faith in Krishna. But these 2 qualities will only get you up to Shantaras, believe it or not. I was reading, I came across a quote by Prabodhananda Saraswati, who is the uncle of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami from Srirangam. And Prabodhananda Saraswati was explaining that, like this is in relation to Shantaras, he was explaining, even if one drinks the Somaras so that one gets immortality like the demigods, what is the use in that? He says, even if one embraces Urvashi, who is the
the topmost, the pinnacle of the apsaras in the heavenly planets, because she herself came directly from the thigh of Narayan Rishi, if you remember that pastime. Even if one embraces Urvashi, then what is the use in that? Even if one tastes the bliss of merging into the impersonal Brahma Jyoti, then what is the use of that? He says, the blades of grass within Vrindavan, just the blades of grass within Vrindavan, who are in Shantaras, when they hear of these things, like embracing the apsaras, of drinking somaras, enjoying heavenly planet pleasures, and merging into Brahma Jyoti, the blades of grass in Vrindavan, they spit at such thoughts, and they detest them completely. That's a blade of grass in Vrindavan. A blade of grass in Vrindavan is completely spitting at such things which are like considered to be so great by the fruitive workers, the karmis in this mature world. The blades of grass in Vrindavan are spitting at such things. We don't want that. We just want to stay as a blade of grass in Vrindavan, so that Krishna and his associates can trample on us and give us the dust of the lotus feet. So, and that's something that Uddhava himself was aspiring for as well. Gulma, he was aspiring to become a creeper in Vrindavan. So, okay, so Dasyaras has these two, and then Srila Prabhupada explains that, the Shantaras has unflinching faith in Krishna and cessation of material desires. Then if we take Dasyaras, Srila Prabhupada explains that Dasyaras contains these two qualities that Shantaras had, plus it also contains the quality of taste for transcendental service. So the taste to exhibit or conduct transcendental service for Krishna, that's the defining characteristic or quality within Dasyaras. Then if you come to Sakyaras, it contains the previous three qualities, plus confidential attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which in Sanskrit is known as Vishramba. On the platform of Vishramba, there is no sense of awe or veneration towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, in the transcendental fraternal relationship, Sakyaras, there are three transcendental characteristics: the sense of greatness, the sense of service, and the sense of intimacy without awe and veneration. Then if you come to Vatsalyaras, it contains these previous four characteristics, plus the characteristic of one considers the Supreme Lord to be dependent on his or her mercy. This is the defining characteristic of Vatsalyaras. And then you come to spiritually the most superior. Actually, all of these are pure and superior, but still we understand that Madhurya Ras is the most superior rasa relationship that the soul can have with Krishna. And one reason why is because it contains the qualities and characteristics with which come in all the preceding rasas. So in Madhurya Ras, all these previous qualities that we discussed, they are exhibited in complete fullness. In complete fullness. So in loving relationships between two people, especially in the conjugal relationships, sometimes one may take care of the other person, of their lover, just like a parent would take care of their child or their dependent. There's the aspect of service as well. Sometimes one of the people in a conjugal relationship, in a loving relationship, they may act as a servant and serve the other person by cooking for them, or buying some flowers for them or something like that on their birthday or something. Or for example, there can be friendship between them as well. So all these previous characteristics are exhibited in fullness in Madhurya Ras. So in the same way, just as Madhurya Ras, which is a superior rasa, contains within it the characteristics of the preceding rasas in fullness, in the same way we can understand that the superior energy of Krishna is superior because it contains within it not just the Satchit Ananda aspect, but also the aspect of whatever is there present within the inferior energy of Krishna. In that way, the Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests inferior energy, but at the same time is not affected from it. Just like the sun, from the sun comes these contrary energies, which apparently seem to block the sun, the rain, the clouds, the darkness, and the snow, but the sun itself is not affected. Whenever I think of the example of the sun, I remember when I was a young boy that time. My father, he really liked to play that computer game Flight Simulator. So I remember once he came home and he brought this really high-tech joystick, and it had this panel there with the throttle, so you can increase the throttle of the airplane, and then it takes off, and then you slowly pull the joystick back so the airplane goes up. So I remember playing that as a young boy, and I remember flying a 747 jumbo jet. And it was a very cloudy day, and it was raining on the airport, and then we took off, and then we kept, I used to really keep going higher and higher into the dark thundering clouds, and all of a sudden, there'll be bright sunlight. As soon as you go on top of the cloudy layer, there'll be like bright sunlight, blue sky, bright sunlight. And I used to choose the view, which is like a third angle view, so you see the plane flying from outside. Right? So there's a camera looking at the plane from the outside. So you're not looking from the inside the cockpit, but you're looking from outside. And I used to like to see the plane going through the dark clouds, and then finally it comes and it's just a clear blue sky. So Krishna is like that. He creates the inferior situations which are occurring in the material world, but at the same time, because he's situated in the spiritual world, in the spiritual sky, just like the sun is situated beyond the clouds, he's not affected by that. This particular verse, today's verse, is talking about the example of the soul. How is the soul, who is also Satchidananda, engaging in activities which are destructive for itself, for himself, herself? Even though Krishna as Paramatma is present within the heart of the soul, of the body. How is the soul engaged in such things? So the answer which Maitreya Muni is giving is a very vivid answer. The living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head is cut off. And he says, Srila Prabhupada gives the example, he takes it further and he gives the example of a teacher in school threatening his pupil that he would cut off the student's head and hang it on the wall if the child misbehaved. Now, obviously, if Srila Prabhupada explains that if your head is cut off, then you lose the power to see. So, if the teacher did happen to do that to the student wouldn't be able to look at his head hanging on the wall. But the student, being immature and incomplete in knowledge, he thinks this is true, and he becomes frightened. And because he becomes frightened and fearful, what does the student do? He then starts to listen to the teacher. In the same way, Srila Prabhupada explains, just as it's not possible to see your head hanging on the wall after it's being cut off, in the same way it is not possible for the spirit soul to become material and experience birth and death. It's just not possible. But because we're covered, the merciful teacher, Krishna, he has covered us with the false ego, which makes us think that we are matter, which makes us forget that the soul doesn't take birth, na jayate mriyate va kadachin, the soul doesn't die. We think that we can die. Just as the student thinks, because of a lack of knowledge, the student thinks that his head can be cut off, and he can see his head being cutting off. Similarly, the soul thinks something which is actually not possible. It's not dharmically possible for the soul to die, for spiritual energy to die. But because of the false ego, we think that it is possible. And therefore what happens? The soul becomes scared. And this is the lesson that Krishna wants to teach the soul. Life after life, the soul experiences this misery, this fear in the form of repeated birth and death, old age and disease, which gradually creates an impetus for the soul to surrender to Krishna. Of course, that's not the only way the soul surrenders. The soul also surrenders if the soul gets the association of devotees. But I remember one of my senior God brothers, he was telling me when I joined Krishna consciousness, he was telling me that before becoming a devotee, he was telling me that throughout the week he would just work hard at his workplace, and then when it came to Friday night, him and his friends, every single Friday night, for weeks and for weeks and for years and years, at Friday night, they would just go to the bar and just drink and just party and just sing songs, and that's all they would do. It never occurred to them that this is actually getting very hackneyed, it's getting very trite, that we should do something else, that this is actually not very pleasurable. Every single Friday night, for years and years, that's all they would do. So here's the realization was, it's just not possible, for the soul to just become disgusted with the material world, material pleasures, and just turn to spiritual life. However, the hackneyed nature of material enjoyment does create a springboard. It does create an impetus to jump into spiritual life. How? He was telling me that although he was doing this, going to the pub every single Friday for years, he did get tired of it, but he helplessly kept doing it because that's all he knew. That's the only enjoyment he knew. So because he was tired, as soon as he came across bhakti, as soon as he came across devotees and the knowledge of Krishna consciousness, that tiredness resulting from material enjoyment propelled him to actually take up the bhakti process with even greater enthusiasm. So in that way it can help. I remember when I was a new devotee, I was going through the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and I came across two verses which really struck to me. And both of these are successive verses which come in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So it's verse 57 and 58. And it's very nice, very simple to remember as well. Chetasa sarva karmani mai sanyasya matpara buddhi yogam upashritya machita satatam bhava. Have you heard this verse? Yeah, very famous verse. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, right at the conclusion of their conversation, he's saying, in all activities, just depend on me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. This is Krishna's instruction, to be always conscious of him. And Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport that actually, without knowledge, a soul doesn't know what to do. A soul doesn't know what he should be doing, what he shouldn't be doing, who he is, what's the purpose of life. A soul has no idea what he should be doing. And Kali Yuga is symptomized by these characteristics. Because of a lack of transcendental knowledge, Kali Yuga is symptomized by these characteristics. That's why if you look at the Uddhava Gita, how the Uddhava Gita is spoken, if you actually see why did Krishna speak such intimate knowledge to Uddhava, the Acharyas explain that Krishna was thinking to himself that now, because the context, I'll just set the context, Krishna had killed pretty much all the demons, right? Dantavakra was dead, Shishupal was dead, Jarasandha was slain, Kamsa was slain, and all these other demons were slain. And then he had saved his devotees as well, like the 16,000 queens he had saved. He had reciprocated very nicely with his devotees, like the Pandavas, or even someone like Shrutadev and Bahulashva. So he had done what he came down to do for. So while Krishna was sitting one day in Dwarka, the demigods headed by Brahma and Lord Shiva, they came. And they glorified Krishna in Dwarka. And they told him that the reason for which we asked you to descend to this material world, you've completely fulfilled that purpose, now you can go. But then the Acharyas explained that Krishna was thinking to himself that I've done all these things, but I have not found the time to go to meet the sages in Badrikashram. They're my great devotees, actually, but I did not find the time to actually leave Dwarka and to travel to Badrikashram to give them transcendental knowledge so that they can also come back to Godhead. So that's the background as to why he deputed his pure devotee, Uddhava, to first go to Badrikashram. Actually, Krishna could have taken Uddhava with him, straight back home, back to Godhead, along with the other Yadavas as well, in the battle that ensued, the Moshali Leela. But because he was his special pure devotee, Krishna deputed Uddhava to first teach him this intimate transcendental knowledge and then take it to Badrikashram. After that, Uddhava would go back to home, back to Godhead, back to the spiritual world. But Krishna tells him that Kali Yuga is coming It's fast coming. And I don't want you to stay here, Uddhava. You should get out of this mature world. You should get out of this Kali Yuga situation. And you should come home back to Godhead. You should come back to my Paramam Dham. So that's the desire of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the way we get there is through our mind. Our mind is the instrument which determines our destination after this present physical life. So just like we've been talking about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and his Vaishnava K in the classes on Wednesday evening. So one of the big themes there is about getting distracted from pure devotional service, criticizing devotees and Vaishnava Aparad. These are some of the common themes that Maharaj Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj he tackles. So recently I heard that pure devotees actually have no time to waste thinking about anything else other than Krishna. They have no time to waste. Thoughts of sense gratification are absent from their minds. Thoughts of merging into the Supreme are absent from their minds. And what to speak of criticizing other devotees or criticizing even the jivas out there. These thoughts don't come into the mind of a pure devotee because the pure devotee knows that he has or she has just a limited amount of time to fix the mind on Krishna, to mold the mind in such a way that the mind spontaneously is able to think of Krishna. If one comes to that level, then one can be guaranteed very nicely, very easily to go back home, back to Godhead. That's why Krishna keeps saying in many different chapters in the Bhagavad Gita, focus your mind on me. Keep focusing your mind on me. If the mind gets distracted, if it goes somewhere else, bring the mind back to Krishna's lotus feet. And then Krishna in text 58 gives us the result of not fixing our mind on Krishna. He says, Matchita sarva durgani mat prasadat tarishyasi atachetvam ahankaran na shoshasi vinangshasi. This is a very powerful verse. Translation is, if you become conscious of me, he tells Arjuna, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. That's the first thing. So whatever obstacles we face, mental, physical, emotional, we can overcome all obstacles just by understanding that Krishna is the orchestrator behind everything here. So focusing our mind on Krishna. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through the false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. So that's something very powerful. He says, if you don't focus your mind on me, and you decide to act with your false ego, thinking that you're the doer of your actions, you're the control of whatever is going on, and you don't hear me, he says specifically, don't hear me. Now we know that Krishna from within the heart is instructing us. Krishna from within the heart is instructing the pure devotee, and Krishna from without, as a spiritual master, is also instructing the pure devotee. So we can also extend this analogy, and we can say that if one doesn't listen submissively to one's authorities, to other Vaishnavas, to the sadhus, but instead one acts even within Krishna consciousness independently, then Krishna says, you will be lost. So that's some very potent advice given by Krishna. I'll just finish with a nice story. This is a story which comes from the Varaha, the Vamana Puran. And it's a story of how the great devotee Prahlad Maharaj, we already know that Prahlad Maharaj, he conquered Lord Vishnu. He conquered Lord Nrsimhadev with his bhakti and his tremendous faith, such that even other demigods like Brahma, the goddess of fortune herself, were not able to pacify Nrsimhadev. But Prahlad, through his innocence and his pure faith and devotion and compassion for his father, he conquered the heart of Lord Nrsimha. And then after that Leela, he actually, we see that picture in Srimad Bhagavatam where Brahma is actually coronating Prahlad Maharaj and he's making him the king. So for many, many, many years, Prahlad Maharaj is the king. And even while he's the king, he's still focused on Krishna consciousness. He's still focused on transcendence. Like we see in the Srimad Bhagavatam, when Prahlad Maharaj is touring in his kingdom with his ministers, he comes upon the Python man. Right? We see that incident. And Prahlad Maharaj is struck with wonder how such a person can just lie down a jagra vritti, right? Just depending on whatever is coming by the will of the Supreme. How can such a person? So he actually, as a king, he actually kneels down next to this naked yogi, this Python yogi, and inquires from him as to how he's able, what is his consciousness, what is the level of his realization. So even though he's such a great king, the kings used to do that. They used to bow down and listen submissively to great sadhus, sages, to hear about them so that they can learn from them. So like this, Prahlad Maharaj was ruling his kingdom in a very Krishna conscious way. And one day, what happens is that he wants to go on pilgrimage. So he asks Chavana Muni, please, dear Chavana Muni, can you please tell me what is the greatest place of pilgrimage, the most sacred place of pilgrimage? And Chavana Muni tells him that, Prahlad Maharaj, you should go to Badrikashram. So Prahlad Maharaj, being a great Kshatriya, being a great ruler, and also a spiritualist, he goes to Badrikashram with some of his ministers again. And when he goes there, he actually sees on a tree stump, he actually sees some shining and splendorous arrows which have entered, the shafts of the arrows have entered into the tree stump. And then afterwards he sees two ascetics, right? Two hermits, just like when Lord Ramachandra, along with Sita Devi and Lakshmana, when they took the Vanvas, right? They were Kshatriyas, but they were dressed like, like brahmacharis or sannyasis, how they would dress in the forest. They were dressing exactly like that. Yet they were carrying their bows and arrows. So some people who would meet them, they'd be a bit confused. Are you a Kshatriya, or, how can you carrying a bow and arrow? So in the same way, Prahlad Maharaj was a bit confused, because here were these two hermits dressed in deerskin, and right next to them, they had this really effulgent, transcendental bow and arrow. So he connected these two things together. So I think these are the hermits that pierced their arrows into this tree trunk. And he inquired from them, you're dressed like hermits, you're dressed like sadhus, but at the same time you carry weapons? How is that? And these two sadhus, they gave him a very sarcastic reply. It's explained that they gave him a very sarcastic reply. And this greatly angered Prahlad Maharaj. And then it came to such a point, that escalation came to such a point that Prahlad Maharaj, just to teach them a lesson, just like we learned from Parikshit Maharaj, how he raised his sword to behead Kali. So in the same way, that's the duty of a Kshatriya, to teach them a lesson that they should not be acting contrary to how they're dressed and how their nature is. Prahlad Maharaj started battling with them. And it's explained that this battle went on for 1,000 years, 1,000 celestial years. A very fierce battle. First of all, it started off with just bows and arrows. Prahlad Maharaj would release one bow. These two hermits were actually Narayan Rishi, by the way. So he was fighting with his beloved Lord Vishnu. But Prahlad Maharaj didn't know at that point in time that they were actually Narayan Rishi. He just thought they were just ordinary sages. So Prahlad Maharaj would release one arrow. They would retaliate by releasing two. Then he would release three. They would release five. Then they came to a point where they just dropped their bows and arrows. They started attacking each other with their maces and their clubs. And then hand to hand. There was a very ferocious fight. And whatever Prahlad Maharaj did, he just could not defeat Narayan Rishi. And again, he thought they were just ordinary sages. So finally, Narayan Rishi, they defeated Prahlad Maharaj. And Prahlad Maharaj thought, how is this possible? I'm empowered by Krishna, I'm empowered by Lord Nrsimhadev, I'm a pure devotee. How is it that I was not able to defeat these two sages? So because of his devotion, it's explained that he actually, he goes away and he ends up meditating on Vishnu, and he actually gets the darshan of Vishnu. So Vishnu comes before him and he tells him that these two sages are actually me, myself. So there's no use of you fighting with me. It's not possible for you to defeat me. So go back and actually devote your life in bhakti, in service to these great saintly personalities. So he actually gives his throne away to another worthy demon. I think his name is Andak. There's an Andaka dynasty. I don't know if it's related, but the name of this demon king was Andak. So he gave away his throne, and in Andak he became the successor to Prahlad Maharaj of the Daityas. And then Prahlad Maharaj, it's explained that he spent the rest of his life, pretty much as a renunciate, devoting his life to serving Vishnu, to serving Narayana Rishi. And the realization that he gets is that I am not able to conquer the Supreme Personality of Godhead through weapons, through rising to the Brahmajyoti, through engaging, through utilizing my false ego in my own free will to enjoy separately from Him. The only way that I can conquer the Supreme Personality of Godhead is by engaging in devotional service to Him. So this is how Prahlad Maharaj conquered the Supreme Personality of Godhead twice. Once as Nrsimhadev and once as Narayana Rishi. So it's a very instructive story. My Guru Maharaj was recently quoting this. I think he was quoting it from Brihad Bhagavatamrita or something like that. So I'm not sure if there's a condensed version of the story in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, but the original story, it's coming from this particular Purana. Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.